time, another episode in our Grand Lodge Candidate Series, round 2022. We did this last year, we're doing it again. Open invitation for any and all Grand Lodge candidates. If you want to take part, by all means, I hope that you will get in touch and join us. We'd love to have you. And today, we are with Right Worshipful Brother Iain Wates. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Worshipful Brother Cameron Abison, so much for the invitation to join you on this podcast. And I must say, you are to be commended for doing these candidate podcasts again this year.
I appreciate that, and it's always absolutely my pleasure. Before we go any further, though, if you want to mention the lodge or lodges to which you belong.
What lodge do I belong to? Muskoka Lodge number 360 in Bracebridge, which is in which is now in Nipissing Muskoka District. It used to be in Muskoka Parry Sound until Muskoka Parry Sound and Nipissing East amalgamated about 5 or 6 years ago. So.
And how are things going right now with your lodge? Are you back to meeting in person? I know some lodges haven't resumed in-person meetings yet.
Well, we're scheduled to go back for our June meeting. That's the earliest that we're going to start, and then of course we're closed down for July and August. This year in particular, one of the impetus of trying to get a meeting in June is that the DDGM for our district is from our lodge, by Worshipful Brother Michael Blakely. So we wanted to make sure that he was at least able to be able to visit in his mother lodge at some point before his year ends. So that's the plan right now.
And tell me a little bit about your Masonic career thus far. The positions you've held in lodge and in Freemasonry and your relationship with Grand Lodge. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've been a Mason for 37 years. As I mentioned, I'm a member and I'm a past master of Muskoka Lodge 360. In 2004, I was the district secretary for what was then Muskoka Parry Sound District. I'm a longtime member of Heritage Lodge number 730, and I'm a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason in the Valley of Barrie. I started my committee work with Grand Lodge in and around 2006, just after I had finished my year as Grand Stewart. And in 2009, I was appointed to the Board of General Purposes. And then since 2011, I have been fortunate enough to be an elected member of the board since that time. I'm a director on both the Masonic Foundation of Ontario and the Masonship Foundation of Ontario, and Grand Representative of the Grand Lodge of Kansas, and I'm currently the chairman for benevolence with our Grand Lodge. And while I've been doing that, I've also been a member of the membership pillar, where I've taken the lead on many new initiatives that I've helped develop. So that pretty much brings you up to date to where I am right now.
This is an interesting year for Grand Lodge. It's the first time that Grand Lodge has gone with the hybrid model of virtual voting and in-person communication. Last year, it was completely virtual. And then obviously before that, it's always been in person for the entirety of it. What are your thoughts as to maintaining the virtual voting, but also including the in-person portion, and what in your district or with your discussions, what do you think other Masons will think of it, and how do you think it's going to go?
Well, I've been a real advocate for electronic voting for quite some time, and it's been on the table both with the board and with the management committee when I sat there for 2 years about what the future would look like. And the main reason that we were looking in that direction is that it provides a real opportunity for everyone to be able to exercise their franchise. Um, you know, we're in a vast jurisdiction. And, you know, I don't know whether you've ever tried to travel out of this province, but just from where I live, just in Bracebridge, I can't make it out of Ontario to Manitoba in 24 hours. So it's a big jurisdiction. So consequently, no matter where the annual communication has been or is in the future, trying to get to the annual communication to exercise your franchise is just not possible for many brethren. So electronic voting levels the playing field in that and provides that opportunity to everybody to be able to do that. You know, and I think with having electronic voting, it opens up a good number of opportunities for us to take a hard look at how our annual communication actually operates. Normally, when we have our in-person, as we will again this year, we have a period of seminars and workshops. And that's an important educational component of our annual communication. And I think that, you know, we need to spend a little bit more time and maybe do more and provide more in that regard at our annual communication. So in my view, this opens up the opportunity to make our annual communication more of a conference style meeting of brethren from all over Ontario and add a larger component of Masonic education. Also, by not having a need for 22 meeting rooms in order to hold district meetings and hold the elections for the DDGM, it does open up an opportunity and has opened up an opportunity to think about holding the annual communication somewhere else other than the Royal York Hotel. And this year we're doing that in Richmond Hill. And I'm a big proponent of trying to move the annual jurisdiction around, or the annual communication rather, around the jurisdiction to other major centers so that we can bring the annual communication to those men. We have from time to time held special communications of Grand Lodge, which have been very successful. The most recent one was up in North Bay a few years ago, but they've been held in Ottawa, they've been held in Thunder Bay, and those are all really well received. So that allows the workings of our annual communication to be brought to Masons a little closer to their home if we move it around, you know. So
I concur 100%. I've argued for, and we brought up a lot in the last year's and even this year's Grand Lodge Candidate Series, the potential benefit or benefits of bringing Grand Lodge to other jurisdictions and other locations, both for Freemasonry and for those jurisdictions. You know, a lot of medium-sized towns, you know, would benefit economically a great deal from having a whole bunch of Masons show up. You know, obviously the hotels would benefit, the restaurants, the city itself.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the other thing that you're going to see in the future is that, I mean, we've traditionally held our annual communication in the middle of the week. And with the changes that we have already made and maybe some thoughts in the future, I see that it maybe the annual communication may in the future be start on a Friday night and carry over into Saturday, and people leave on Sunday. So that in itself, by holding it during a weekend, provides an opportunity for more people to attend wherever the annual communication is being held as well.
How much do you think that Freemasonry has um, insulated itself or tried to separate itself from some of these more like mundane but really important issues, like the economics of a Grand Lodge and where it's held and moving it around and the benefits to a community. It seems like, trying to think of how to put this. Well, like, I'll give an example, right? One thing I've brought up uh, on Facebook, on social media, in different Masonic groups I'm in, is that this year there's the Ontario staycation tax credit. So if you're purchasing accommodations in the province of Ontario, hotel, Airbnb, you're able to get 20% of that back at tax time, right? And that's not an issue of ritual. That's not an issue of esoterics. That's not an issue of anything beyond. But it still seems that it's something that Freemasons should know about and should be thinking about. Like, it seems like a lot of Freemasons are very concerned about things like ritual and secrecy and all that type of jazz. But when it comes to the actual nuts and bolts of tax credits, historical buildings, heritage designations, where a Grand Lodge is held, the economic impacts of a Grand Lodge, the economic impacts of even the economic impacts of a lodge on a community. If it's meeting twice a month in a small town and it's bringing in catering twice a month, that can be a big deal for whatever restaurant or place they're using. It just seems, I feel like lately Freemasonry has not done enough to think about that aspect of the craft. Everything seems so much more focused on esotericism and ritual, and not on the actual nuts and bolts of what it means to be a part of the province and a part of the community.
Yeah, it could be that we've never really thought about that because we may, in our own minds, believe that we have a very small impact from an economic perspective. Um, I mean, I know that when large companies like the company I worked for, and they hold their annual conventions, and they know that they're contributing significantly to the economy and the city in which that's being held. But that's in the business world, and in reality, although we need to be operating ourselves like a business, it's not really something I think that we think that much about until somebody like yourself asks the question. I know that for years and years, I mean, for more than 45 years, my lodges held an annual visitors night in Bracebridge. And we get brethren from all over the jurisdiction to attend that. And we'll have 120, 130 Masons in our lodge room. It's a big lodge room, but even then it's crowded. But a lot of those brethren arrive, early afternoon. They generally go to a restaurant somewhere and have a meal and enjoy fellowship after their long drive up and get ready to go to lodge, So I think it's just the fact that we've maybe really never given any much thought to that side of things, that of what you're suggesting.
And I mean, and that goes to the idea of traveling around too. As much as I appreciate the Royal York, and it's always fun to be there, or with 200 or 300 Masons in downtown Toronto might not make the biggest difference economically to downtown Toronto, because it might not be noticed, but 200 to 300 Masons in Ottawa is going to have a bit more of an impact. And then 200 to 300 Masons, if you have it in a medium-sized town like Windsor, even London, that's a pretty significant impact at that point. It's going to be noticed. And then you can have maybe towns can, the governance, city government, municipal government in London, in Windsor, in Ottawa, in North Bay, may then want to partner and work with the lodges there to encourage the Grand Lodge communication, because you can say, we'll bring in 200 Masons and their wives, and they'll spend this much money. They'll go to this many restaurants, this many hotel rooms need to be booked. Like it, I think one of the concerns I've had with Freemasonry lately is, maybe it was always this way, but it seems more and more there's like an insular approach to it, where we sometimes forget that, yes, our ritual is secret, as it should be, and our meetings are for members, as they should be, but we're still part of the communities. We're still part of the province, and we should act in accordance with that, and think about how we can benefit the community at large from an economic standpoint, from a, as a member of the community, and not just charitable work, but actually, providing business and economics. And, it just seems like I don't think we think about that stuff enough.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it's just because it's not something that we've actually really given any real thought to. It's happened over the years, and it turns out it is what it is, and it's not until you start talking with one another. I mean, I know with the board members that travel regularly, and we're going to Grandmaster's receptions in Windsor or wherever we're going to. I know that my wife is heavily involved in retail therapy. So you can be certain, aside from the hotel rooms, that she's had a very small economic impact in Windsor. But you get a bunch of ladies together, and they do that type of thing, and so it all adds up. And it's just great that we are able to do that.
No, and yeah, absolutely. And I think, do you think this year will make a good test case in terms of how well 2-day in-person communications will work? Or do you think, because it's the first year back after COVID, well, I guess not after, we still have COVID, but the first year meeting in person since COVID at Grand Lodge, do you expect there's still to be a level of hesitation among some members to attend, or do you think this will be a good indication of what the future holds for the annual communication?
No, I think this will be a transitional year. People generally are being cautious and still are taking steps pretty slowly. There's an awful lot of lodges that are not reopening until September because they want to be really cautious and see what happens over the course of the summer. So, I expect that the annual communication, it's unlikely we'll see the same numbers as we've seen in the past. We've got a very similar format, but it is jammed into 2 days. But in reality, the actual annual communication itself, with the exception of seminars and workshops, has always been just 2 days, right? The Grand Lodge actually opens on the Wednesday morning, and Wednesday afternoon has always been for district meetings, right? And then Thursday we opened again, and there was the installation and investiture of officers, and so this year, instead of doing seminars and workshops on the Tuesday, we're going to do them on the Wednesday afternoon. So, and the board meeting really made up the bulk of the other 2 or 3 days that was involved. And by going virtually and doing it ahead of a time it saves a lot of time, and it will save some money.
Both are, good things. And, I know I talked about this with Brother Tom. Hey, I remember Most Worship Brother Paul Todd on his circuit of receptions, really emphasizing the idea that, we maybe don't need a 5-day Grand Lodge, and other efficiencies that, that connect to the fact that our craft is shrinking. There's less people in it. There's less men in it. Does a 5-day Grand Lodge still make sense? And this was in 2018, 17, if I recall correctly, when he was on the Grand Lodge receptions or Grand Master receptions. And I think that's right. I'm not sure if a 5-day annual communication is necessary anymore, especially when you add the virtual voting. So
I think that, as I mentioned, the topic of electronic voting has been on the table for quite some time. But, although the last 26 months with COVID has created many, many challenges, it's also created some real big opportunities. And technology has been the biggest thing. I mean, most everybody is very comfortable with using virtual platforms these days. And what it's done, what COVID's done from a technology perspective is it's pushed us outside of our comfort zone, which has been a good thing. And it's forced us to do some things a little quicker than maybe we would have done it otherwise. And so technology is helping to make and drive this change, because there are so many ways of being able to do things differently now.
And do you think that those ways are, or to what extent are those ways here to stay? Even after lodges have returned to in-person meetings, do you think, and how much do you think we'll still see virtual education, virtual voting, virtual events? Do you think that at this point, the virtual will remain integrated within Freemasonry?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt. And let me just talk about my lodge for a second before I move on to Grand Lodge. One of the things, we've been holding virtual meetings for more than a year on our regular meeting night. And we've had members who are still members in good standing who have moved away. They're out west somewhere, Alberta, BC, wherever. They live in Florida. Who knows where they are. And those men have had the opportunity to join with other lodge members and feel more connected than they ever have been. And where they would never get the opportunity to unless they were on vacation, to come to their mother lodge. So we've had some discussions about possibly maybe every couple of months holding a virtual emergent meeting where we can allow those brethren and those members that are not close at hand an opportunity to get together with everybody again. From a Grand Lodge perspective, all you need to do is look at the educational speakers that not only our own Masonic Education Speaker Series has had, but also many, many lodges around the jurisdiction. And we've been able to access speakers that we would never have been able to access any other way than through the virtual platform. I don't see that changing at all. I see that being a continuing thing. I look at the work that I've been involved with the membership pillar, and whether it's an information session for prospective members, or whether it's a lodge secretary workshop, whatever it may be, on any given workshop, we'll have about 25 brethren there. And on that particular day, they could be from Kenora to Cornwall to Windsor to Barrie to Toronto. They're all over the jurisdiction. And if you, in the days when we used to travel, the board members traveled and committee members traveled to put on educational sessions around the jurisdiction, we got pretty excited if we ever got 25 people to show up when you consolidate a couple of districts together. Okay. Well, you don't need to do all that travel. I mean, there's some brethren who have traveled an hour to get to one of those in-person sessions and travel an hour to go home, and they spent more time traveling back and forth than they did for the actual session. So, I don't see, with the very odd exception, I don't see us changing much from the delivery of programs and workshops in virtual, because it's so flexible.
And how do you see that flexibility affecting the in-person side of the craft? I mean, I've heard from more than a couple members, that they, especially since COVID, they find themselves in their PJs by 8 o'clock, and they don't mind jumping on a virtual meeting because they can, they don't even need to wear pants, but getting themselves out to lodge can be a bit of a challenge for them if they've got used to not having to travel. Do you think that there's a risk of the virtual supplanting the in-person, and guys become so used to so much prefer the kind of the easy convenience of virtual, they may be less inclined to actually show up for an in-person meeting?
I don't think so. I mean, we have brethren with varying interests and varying challenges in their own personal lives, and there will always be people who, for one reason or other, will find a reason not to attend lodge. And in a lot of cases, they're very valid, but I don't see it taking away from our in-person meetings, because for me and for most of us, the best part of Freemasonry is the relationships you build. I mean, I know in my time with the board and all the travels that my wife and I, we've got friends all over this province we wouldn't have had any other way other than through traveling through Freemasonry. So those relationships, you can only develop and have them flourish for in-person meetings. But in the end, it still comes down to the lodge. The lodge has to offer a reason for their members to come to lodge. There has to be a reason to go. Okay. And so the Masonic experience that the lodge provides to his members is really important. And a lot of lodges have struggled with that over the years. Others do it exceptionally well. I mean, how many times have you been to a meeting as a visitor and you walk away saying, "Wow, what a night! This was great," and then you meet up with one another 3 or 4 days later, and they're still talking about the night that they visited some lodge because of the experience that they had in that lodge, whether it was how the ritual was done, whether it was education, whatever it was. So in the end, the lodge still needs to make it interesting. You just can't sit back and wait for the members to just show up. You have to give them a reason to be there.
Well, is that, is that realistic or possible? Like, I feel like that's, especially in 2022, like, lodges have kind of, are trying to do this with, two hands tied behind their back, because I think lodges are facing a lot of unique challenges. So why do people go to work? Well, even if they don't like it, well, because they got to get paid, so they go to work. Why do people go, stay home with the family, even if they maybe want to go out with the boys? Well, because, the wife gets mad at them, or they don't see their kids enough, or, whatever it might be. Like, I sometimes feel if a Mason isn't showing up, we have a tendency to say, well, the lodge isn't doing enough to attract that Mason or get him to want to come out. And I feel like that is not always fair to the lodge. I feel like sometimes the Mason is just lazy. Like, it can't always be it can't always be that the lodge isn't doing a sufficient job to attract or to retain members in terms of attendance. Sometimes it's on the brother. He has a responsibility to show up as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. There will always be isolated incidents. But I mean, when you look at the statistics, that all you have to do is look at the annual proceedings of Grand Lodge. We've been, membership retention has been a big issue for more than 15 years. We've been losing 2,000 members through demits and suspensions for more than 15 years. And a lot of those men who either get suspended or take a demit tell us that they didn't have fun going to lodge. They didn't enjoy themselves. So that's the reason why they took a demit, or that's the reason why they stopped paying their dues. There will always be men, and it doesn't matter whether it's Freemasonry or it's a service club, who join and are very difficult to motivate. Okay. But when we talk about membership retention, we're talking about the broad strokes across the jurisdiction. And I know, so for some, that can be kind of bothersome. And I know all too well, there's many lodges in our jurisdiction who are doing an absolutely fabulous job about keeping their members interested, ensuring that when they have a prospective candidate, they make that man feel like he's part of a family, and that and that family relationship is a reason for him to come back to lodge and want to learn. And he meets people that he'd never met before. So those are all things that have to be done, and successful lodges are doing those. And it's difficult. I know. I mean, we have I don't know. I think our average membership across the jurisdiction is somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 or 50 brethren in a lodge.
Well, and that's membership. That's not actual attendance.
Oh, no. You're lucky if you get 15 or 20% of that. So, but again, I look at some of the other things that I've been involved with. I've been involved with Cornerstone for a long time, and right from the days where we scooped it up from the Grand Lodge of Utah and asked their permission to use what they called their master builder program. I've seen lodges that have used the Cornerstone program to revitalize themselves and create some teamwork within the lodge and make things more interesting, and have come away being better lodges for that. So in the end, it's a lot like your brother who is tough to motivate to come to lodge. There has to be a will to do that. And I know I've watched it with lodges where more senior members have tried to save lodges from going dark, and they work hard and they work hard and they work hard, and it just doesn't seem to make any difference, and they get burned out. And there's nobody to pick up the torch to try and keep it going.
Well, and to what extent is that a societal issue, a Masonic issue?
I don't know that it's a Masonic issue. I mean, I think you speak to anybody who's in any organization, only 20% of the people do all the work. It doesn't matter what volunteer organization you're talking about. On average, there's only 20% of the people that are doing all the work. And if you want to get a job done, what's the first thing you do? You go to the busiest guy in the lodge, because generally he'll say yes and he'll get the job done.
So, and I mean, that goes to, so that the Pareto principle, right, is what's that called, is that idea that a majority of anything goes to a minority of people. Majority of work goes to, 80-20. In my experience, it's like 90-10, 10% of the people, 90% of the work. And I've heard guys argue that those numbers are just set in stone. There's nothing that can be done about it. So the only solution is to basically open the west gate as wide as possible and get as many people through. Because their argument goes, if you want, let's say 100 dedicated masons in a lodge, if you want 100 dedicated masons, you need to have a membership of 1,000, and you'll get your 10%, and then you'll get your 100 dedicated. And if you have 500 members, you'll get 50 dedicated. And if you have 100, you'll have 10. And it doesn't really, the nature of the members you bring in is almost irrelevant, because you're going to get that 10%. And the other 900 are just, they'll just bankroll the 100 that do all the work, basically, with their dues. And then others argue, no, it is possible to play with those numbers a little bit. And actually, if you select for talent and select carefully at the applicant stage, you can actually play with those numbers, and you can maybe get a lodge where 30% of people do 70% of the work, or maybe even 40% do 60% of the work. Like, it's possible if you get the right people. And I don't know where I stand on it. I used to be a believer in, be a careful selector, but more and more I think, if you want 100 dedicated masons, you need 1,000 members. I don't see a lot of those Pareto principles seem, it's very hard to break.
Well, it's tough. I mean, with any organization like ours, the slippery slope, things can happen pretty quickly, and things can go downhill pretty quickly. And when the decision is made that either the lodge has hit the bottom, or enough people have had enough and they want to try and do something, if the slide has occurred over 10 years, you're not going to get it turned around in 10 years, because the hill's too high to climb. But that's not a reason to try and start to make change. This is about changing the culture in the lodge itself, and the minute that you start to and reintroducing and bringing in our prospective members and making them a part of the renewal, because they're the lifeblood of any lodge. Because our age group, our members, average age is 70, 65 or 70. So having younger masons involved and getting enthused and bringing forward ideas and doing those things, that will generate excitement, and generate excitement within the community. I mean, I know my lodge, I had to be really careful when I started traveling and doing Grand Lodge work early on, because I did not dare try and compare my lodge to other lodges, because my lodge, I'm so fortunate to be a member of Muskoka Lodge and the culture that we've got. And we're blessed. We've worked hard at that. We have 6, 7 initiations every year. We don't lose members. We involve the new members. We have no past masters in the chairs except where they're supposed to be. But for us, that's normal. But there was probably a time where it wasn't normal for us. Somebody put a lot of work and effort into getting us to where we are today. And, I see that as I travel around over my many years. Lots of lodges are doing really great things and trying to improve themselves. And it's making a difference. But we've got 480 some odd lodges in the jurisdiction. To expect that we're going to be able to, in a 2 or 3 year period, make 480 vibrant lodges, and that's just simply not going to happen. Well, it's unfortunate.
So for your lodge, because you brought up earlier the 80-20 rule. Would you say that that rule holds in your lodge, or have you guys managed to break that rule and you have more than, it's not 20% of the people doing 80% of the work?
No, well, I think we're certainly higher than 20%. I know that if something's going on within the lodge, every single lodge officer is involved. We have committee chairmen appointed by the worshipful master, and they've got committee members, and they get involved in what they're doing. We just held for the first time in 2 years a maple syrup pancake brunch outside on the 1st of May. That we had in a neighborhood of about 70 or 80 between members, wives, and family that were there.
Did that include visitors from other lodges, or was that just
no? It's just ours, just ours.
A good turnout.
Yeah. So, but those are things that we do regularly. We just haven't been able to do in the last 2 years. I mean, I think about Quarry Lodge down in St. Lawrence. It started about 15 years ago or more that they wanted to do something a little different. And it generated all kinds of interest, not only within their district, but around the jurisdiction. So it's those types of things that lodges needs to branch out and try and do that. And I know everybody feels that they're short of manpower, but what you need to do is you need to try something, and when it becomes successful, now you've got a success that you achieved. Now you're going to try and do something else to add to that success, and add to it, and before you know it, things slowly improve. But it certainly isn't going to happen overnight.
Maybe not overnight, but do you think that it's possible to see? You mentioned the numbers at the start, right? Losing about 2,000 members per year. I don't know how much we're gaining, but I think on net we're still, losing far more than we're gaining in Ontario. The Windsor Masonic Temple, when it was built, the number of Masons in Ontario was just below 100,000. It got to over 100,000 a couple years after that. And the last number I had heard was we have about 33,000 Masons in Ontario now.
Oh, 28,000. Yeah.
Okay, so we dropped by about 72,000.
Yeah, but I think you have to put that into proper context, as to what happened after the Second World War and on into the early 60s, where men were looking for things like that Freemasonry offered, and they joined everywhere. And we had a huge explosion of lodges all over the jurisdiction. And they were needed at that time because everybody wanted to have a lodge here and there, and we had large numbers, but now we've swung the other way. And and a lot of it is, we've lost some generations along the way to Freemasonry. So that has hurt as well. But I think all we're seeing is that we're just seeing us go back to maybe where we were a long while ago. And I think in the end, the quality is going to be what we're going to have rather than quantity. So,
do you think it's possible, though, to do that, to go back to, like, I've always thought in terms of whether it's a business or whatever it is, what really matters isn't absolute numbers. What matters is trend lines. So let's say the explosions in Masonic growth never occurred in the 20th century. The two big ones were after World War I, after World War II. Right. Let's say that those explosions in membership never took place. and our membership stayed roughly the same, stayed relatively static at, say, 35,000 members in the province from 1920 to present. I would say that, 30,000, 35,000 is a really good number because we've maintained where we're at. But to go from, 100,000 to 28,000, maybe in absolute numbers, yes, we've been at 28,000 before. But if we go from that high to that low, that's a different type of trend line. I think that's more concerning to me.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a fair comparison to talk about our numbers when we were in the 100,000 versus to where we are now, because we live in there were different worlds. Back in those days, Freemasonry was about the only thing that was going on in town. Okay. So we were, in many instances, the only game in town. Well, today, we're far from being the only game in town anymore. And back in those days with 100,000, most mothers didn't work. They just stayed at home and they raised their families. Now, today, you pretty much need to have 2 wage earners in the house. So, time is more tough to come by. There's a million things for kids to do. So that means mom and dad are busy taking them here, there, and anywhere if they can afford to do that. So I think it's a different time, but we've got some advantages that they didn't have back in those days as well. So, I think it's just coming to grips with it. I think a lot of the newer members have a real good handle on what a lodge needs to do in their communities in order to be able to attract men. We just need to be listening to them and trying some of those things. Because if you try something out, what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work, or maybe doesn't work as well as you had hoped. So what do? You learn from it and you try something different the next time,
No, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of Masonic lodges that are afraid to try something and fail, but I agree with you 100%. As long as you learn from it, if it doesn't work, you figure out why it didn't work and you try again, right? You try again. There's no limit number of times you can try something, right? Better to try it, and eventually you'll figure it out and you'll become successful at it.
I hear it, you hear it, we all hear it. There's frustration out there because in some lodges, the more veteran members are reluctant to try something new. But when all things, and you look at everything, some people say that there's an age gap, and yes, from a numerical number, there's an age gap. But if you put your newer members and your more veteran members together and you put them in a setting where they can sit and talk to one another and socialize, guess what? They don't think they've got as much different from one another as they thought initially, and they, who knows? I mean, the fellow that you're talking to may have been a lawyer 50 years ago, and you're a lawyer, and you found you didn't know he was a lawyer. Well, you got something in common, right? Even though it's different eras. So, this whole idea that we've got an age gap, yeah, it's only a number as far as I'm concerned. If we put our members in a situation where they can talk to one another and learn from one another, then relationships will be built and they'll love to do things together.
You're absolutely right on that as well. I think the age gap issue isn't so much about membership not communicating with each other, because you know, you're absolutely right. In lodge, you'll see the 70-year-old member sitting with the 23-year-old member sitting with the 45-year-old member, right? And it can be a wonderful thing to see because they do find a lot of areas in common with each other that they maybe weren't expecting, especially the younger guys with the older fellas. I think the age gap more, the concern with the age gap more has to do with um it is why our numbers dropped so precipitously, especially during the 60s, right? Like great grandfather brings the grandfather in, but grandfather doesn't bring the father in. So you
Right.
got to wait the generation to get the grandson in, right? And by that time, the grandfather's lodge may have been struggling for so long because no fathers came, joined. The grandson ends up joining a lodge that is significantly depleted as compared to when his grandfather was in it. I think that's more the issue with the age gap. It's not a matter of connection. It's just an explanation as to why so many lodges struggle because, you see it when you don't have a lot of people in that 50 to 70-year range, when it's 70 up and 20 to 30 or 21 to 30. I've seen lodges like that, and they have a really tough time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It can be a real struggle.
Yeah. 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 Well, and the other challenge that we have, the lodges have today, from a mindset perspective, is that for most all of the 20th century, men came to us in a traditional manner. Okay. Their father was a Mason, the son becomes a Mason. Maybe an uncle was a Mason. Maybe their neighbor was a Mason. Maybe a colleague was a Mason. That's how they came. And people knew the new members that were coming in. That's not the way it is today. Close to 75% from what we've seen in the last few years, close to 75% of all of our new members come from a non-traditional path, and that is websites, social media, those types of things. The other 25% is the traditional form. And lodges have struggled to how they can handle that. Our Grand Lodge put together a program called the 5 Steps to Application, specifically to help out with this particular situation where it's so important to get to know the member. I mean, I talk about that 75%, 85% of that group today don't even know a Mason. I see it every day come across my computer with the tracking we're doing of new members. Most of these new members don't even know a Mason. So when their information is passed along to a lodge that is near where the man lives, there's much work to be done in order to get to a point where you're going to know him well enough to be able to find 2 brethren in the lodge to sponsor him. So that's an additional challenge that's out there right now. Many lodges have been doing that virtually as well during COVID, but sorry.
No, we do. Harmony Lodge has done that with our virtual meetings. But I think there's an answer, or I think that there's a question there that really needs to be answered, and that would affect a lot of what we're talking about, right? Which is, okay, so if you don't know a Mason, and it's one thing if it's happening to a smaller extent, but when it's, the vast majority of new members or new applicants, then if a young man, or it could be an older man, I suppose, if a new applicant doesn't know any Masons, doesn't have any Masonic connections in his family, or at least none that he's aware of, or of which he's aware, why would he then be interested in joining, right? The only reason I could think of is because he's seen something, most likely in social media, or come across a website that has interested him. But even then, what is it that he's seen that is causing him to be interested?
Well,
Because it's got to speak to something that's missing in modern society that that person is looking for, or in his life that that person is looking for.
yeah, I think they're looking to. Well, I know they're looking. I've been involved with over the last 13, 14 months with the information session, Freemasonry in Ontario information sessions we've been doing, where we've had more than 500 men join us. Actually, I've got another one scheduled for next week. And they've done their own research in a lot of instances. It's surprising how many have thought about Freemasonry, maybe read something about Freemasonry, and maybe at the time it didn't twig to them that they wanted to do something. As they got a little older, they got more interest in those kinds of things. They've done a lot of work. Most of these men have done a lot of work to find out things about Freemasonry. And all they want to do is they want to have the opportunity to join. And the one really rewarding thing that we've been doing in the last 13 or 14 months are these information sessions where we talk to 25 men on a nightly basis, a couple of times a month. Different men who have come through our Grand Lodge website or the Be a Freemason website. And we just try to answer their questions, give them an overview of what Freemasonry is all about, and then encourage the DDGMs, who have been extremely cooperative, and the lodges to engage these men and learn more about them. So,
but what are they finding that causes them to have that initial interest and desire to reach out? Because for myself, I come from a Masonic family. My dad, both my grandfathers, great grandfathers, were all Freemasons. I grew up. I feel like I was one of the last generations, and I'm only 38. I feel like I was one of the last generations to really kind of grow up with Freemasonry as an active part of my life. I remember Christmas parties at the Masonic Lodge. I remember waiting for my dad to finish his meeting, being downstairs while they met upstairs because they met above the bar. I remember I've told the story about, my dad worked early morning. My dad would leave for work around 7 in the morning. So he would get up before me and he would sit at the kitchen table practicing his work. And at the time, I didn't know what he was doing. I was,
right.
5 or whatever. But I hear him talking to himself, thinking my dad's gone crazy at the kitchen table. But I feel like, if you don't have any family connections, so I always assumed I'd be a Mason sooner or later, that I would join. And I never really thought about it beyond that because I knew what it was, or at least I knew what my experiences were with it. If you're brand new to the craft and you have no connections with it, there's got to be something that you see, or something that you see that causes you to have an interest in it and a desire to reach out. I'm just curious. It seems probably whatever it is that gives them that initial interest, it's not being followed through if we're not retaining them. Somewhere between what they see and when they join the lodge, it's not what they expected or what got them interested in the first place.
Well, a lot of them are looking for structure. They're looking for guidance to lead a more moral life, because that's what they read, that's what Freemasonry is about, and they know that it's missing. They listen to what we say when we say, although it's, in my opinion, it's getting very outdated, but we take good men and make them better. But the personal journey that those men, so they read about that, and that intrigues them, and it's something that for a lot of them is missing in their lives. So they're hoping that Freemasonry will fill a void that they believe that they're missing, based on what they've read about Freemasons, So there's a multitude of reasons, but most of them have the thought process that they seem, at least on the surface, to be the ideal candidate. And you're right. I mean, one of the things when we structured this information session, and we don't get into anything very complicated with this, but you always worry that when you set out a next set of expectations to these men, that it doesn't get fulfilled at the other end. Now, we don't talk about anything too fancy. We talk about being equal and integrity, and we talk about the types of things that go on outside of our lodge from a social perspective and from relationships. A little bit about the Masonic journey. We talk about the work that lodges do in the community and all of those types of things. So it's a really broad overview about what they're going to find in a lodge. But we also know that there are many lodges that don't do all of those things, and I know we always have conversations. I know Right Worshipful Brother John Hay and I always have conversations about, are we setting these men up for failure? And we don't believe that we are. And we believe that we're seeing things get a little bit brighter with most lodges. So there's hope there. And the more that they're aware of what Freemasonry is about, I think that can only benefit us in the long run. So
I can't imagine how you would be setting anybody up for failure, especially because these information sessions are so new. Like, they started during the pandemic, if I understand correctly. I know we've had applicants take part in Harmony. I can't see how it would set them up for failure.
Well,
I just think it's a fascinating question.
Go
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. See, in your case, you're doing exactly what you need to do with those men. You couldn't take those new men. Harmony would have received information about prospective members, contacted them, maybe gone for coffee with them, shot the breeze, got to know them a little bit better, met them again, maybe invited them to a large barbecue that was going on. We haven't been able to do that for the last 26 months. And so those lodges who are used to doing that type of thing have switched gears to a virtual setting where at the virtual meetings, there's nothing that a non-Mason can't hear. So that's how lodges like Harmony have continued to engage those prospective members and done their best, given the constraints of COVID, to be able to make them a part of the Harmony family, and then when things start to open up, they can get more involved and that kind of thing. But there's lots of lodges who took the shutdown literally and did nothing for 26 months.
Wow, that's just an example of laziness, right? There are plenty who did it, and it's unfortunate. I'm proud to say Harmony Lodge certainly didn't. My lodge, Windsor didn't. It's a shame when stuff like that happens.
Well, and unfortunately, once again, I see it come across my computer every day. We still have lodges that don't follow up with prospective members that are forwarded their way. And that's sad. We do our best to try and help that process. And sometimes it just doesn't work. Fortunately, in some areas, we have numerous lodges that are fairly close to where that man might be. So we've recommended that he be moved to a different lodge. And when that kind of thing has happened, the man's been well treated and looked after and is happy, but, and once again, it's, every lodge is different. Every circumstance is different. And, I think the most encouraging thing for me was watching how much work so many of our lodges actually did during the pandemic, and within the community as well, how so many lodges stepped up. And that's just a measure of what type of culture they've got in those lodges, that they were able to do that during the pandemic,
No, and a lot of lodges did some really amazing things, including mine. But yeah, it's a fascinating question, I think, and there's probably something in there that could really help the craft, which is if 75% of new Masons are coming in with no Masonic connections, they don't know a Mason. And if 85% of those are coming from non-traditional sources, websites, email, Facebook, social media, whatever it is, they're seeing something online in popular culture. They're seeing something somewhere that is piquing their interest enough to make them desirous of joining, or at least of reaching out. And it's not going to be exactly the same for everybody, but there's probably some overlap in terms of what it is they're seeing that makes them interested. And then if they're not being retained, it must be because whatever it is that made them interested is not present in the lodges. Or they completely overestimated their own abilities in relation to time, right? Because you're 23 and you're still in school, you join, then you're 26 and you got a wife and you got a kid. Maybe you just don't have the time to do it. There's always that as a possibility, but in that case, I don't know if they would demit or stop paying dues. They would just.
Well, we've had certainly over during COVID and the interest that was shown, we've had men who expressed an interest, and then after that interest was pursued, have made the decision that for their own personal circumstances at the moment, that they can't continue with their desire to join Freemasonry. So, we've kept track of those men and kept that. We've had a lot of men come back in the last 6 months who had indicated that for one reason or other, they couldn't move forward, that contact us and say, we're able to do that. We're in a better position personally now than what we were. So it's when you have somebody who comes back to you and says, oh, I can do this now. Can you help me out? Then that gives you an idea of the kind of interest that they've got, and, although taking somebody out for coffee and having a conversation with them, inviting them to a virtual meeting, or inviting the man and his partner to a social or a barbecue, for some lodges there's a lot of work involved to do that. Just saying it's fairly easy, and for some it is, because it's just a matter of what they do. But when you're trying to do something new and different, all it looks like is that you don't have the resources to be able to do what you need to do, and things spiral downwards further,
No, I'm seeing that happen as well. But I like what you said earlier, right? Try. The worst that can happen is you don't succeed, well, then you just try again, right? Better than to not have tried at all, I think. And yeah, and I do very much appreciate the work you've been doing. Like I said, one of our candidates, at least one, I think maybe another, took part in the information nights.
Mm-hmm.
And no, that work that you've been doing, it's all the work you do for the craft, but I think that in particular is much, much appreciated. And being here on the podcast, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much. It's been really enjoyable talking with you.